The international sniper competition was supposed to showcase the world's elite marksmen. When Hadley Torres arrived with equipment that looked like it had survived a war zone, the other competitors couldn't hide their smirks. Her rifle scope was cracked and useless, her gear was battered, and she looked more like a refugee from a disaster area than a world-class shooter. They expected her to withdraw. Instead, she removed the damaged scope entirely, switched to iron sights that most modern shooters had never even trained with, and proceeded to demonstrate why technology is just a tool, but skill is eternal. Some people need perfect conditions to perform. Others make perfect performance out of impossible conditions. This is the story of one woman, one rifle, and the iron sights that silenced an entire competition. Hadley Torres was 29 years old and looked like she'd been through hell to reach the Sovereign Defense International Sniper Competition. Her tactical gear was covered in dust and grime. Her rifle case had visible damage from rough handling. When she checked in at the registration desk in Fort Patterson, Montana, the other competitors took one look at her and made assumptions. The competition drew 47 of the world's best military and civilian precision shooters. Representatives from 12 countries, elite military units, championship shooters with custom equipment worth more than most people's cars. This was the Super Bowl of long-range shooting, a 3-day event testing everything from basic marksmanship to complex tactical scenarios under extreme conditions. Hadley had traveled 34 hours to get here, including a military transport flight from an undisclosed location in the Middle East that had experienced significant turbulence, 2 commercial flights with multiple delays, and a rental car that had broken down 50 miles from the venue. Her luggage had been lost by the airline. Her backup equipment had been on that luggage. She'd arrived with exactly what she was carrying: her primary rifle, 1 set of ammunition, and gear that looked like it had survived an actual combat deployment. Because it had. She moved through the registration process with quiet efficiency, answering questions from officials who seemed concerned about her equipment condition. Yes, her rifle was functional. Yes, she had the required ammunition. Yes, she understood the competition rules and scoring system. What she didn't mention was that 72 hours ago she'd been providing overwatch for a convoy evacuation in hostile territory, that her scope had been damaged when her position took indirect fire, or that she'd completed that mission using the exact same iron sights she'd be using in this competition. The official examining her rifle, a civilian rangemaster named Patterson who'd probably never fired a shot in actual combat, frowned at the scope mounted on her rifle. "Ma'am, your optic appears to be damaged. The lens is cracked and the reticle housing looks compromised. You'll need functional equipment to compete." "I'm aware the scope is damaged," Hadley replied calmly. "I'll be removing it and shooting with iron sights." Patterson's frown deepened. "Iron sights?" "Ma'am, this is a precision shooting competition. The longest range target is 1,200 meters. Nobody shoots iron sights at that distance in modern competition." "I do." "The rules require that all competitors use equipment that gives them a reasonable chance of completing the course. Iron sights at extreme range are well within my capability," Hadley interrupted, her voice remaining professional but firm. "The rules don't prohibit iron sights. They only require functional equipment. My rifle's iron sights are functional. Unless you can point to a specific rule violation, I'm competing as registered." Patterson exchanged glances with his supervisor, who'd been listening to the conversation. The supervisor, a retired Army colonel named Henderson, who actually understood what he was seeing, studied Hadley with more careful attention. "Where are you coming from, Miss Torres?" Henderson asked. "Classified location, sir. I'm on authorized leave from active duty." "Active duty with which unit?" "Can't disclose that either, sir." "What I can tell you is that I'm qualified to compete. My equipment meets the functional requirements, and I'm prepared to demonstrate my capability on the range." Henderson nodded slowly. He'd seen enough operators in his career to recognize one standing in front of him, even covered in travel dust and carrying damaged gear. "You're cleared to compete, but I'd recommend you hit the practice range this afternoon to verify your zeros with those iron sights. First live fire is tomorrow at 0600 hours." "Thank you, sir. I'll do that." As Hadley moved away from registration, carrying her rifle case toward the competitor preparation area, she could feel eyes following her. Other shooters watching the woman with obviously damaged equipment who was crazy enough to think she could compete at an international level with iron sights. Among those watching was Alexei Petrov, a Russian competitor who'd won this event 2 years running. He stood with a group of elite shooters, American, British, German, Israeli, all holding coffee and discussing equipment, strategies, and predictions for the competition rankings. "Did you see that?" Petrov said to the group, his English carrying a thick accent. "Woman with broken scope thinks she can compete with iron sights at 1,200 meters. This will be entertaining disaster." David Sullivan, a Canadian Army sniper who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, shook his head. "She looks like she just came from a combat zone. Maybe she doesn't realize this is actual competition, not just qualifying range practice. Or maybe she can't afford proper equipment and this is her only rifle," offered Klaus Fischer, the German representative who was shooting with a custom rifle that cost more than a luxury car. They all laughed, not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of dismissive amusement that came from elite performers watching someone who clearly didn't belong in their league. Hadley heard none of this. She'd already moved to the equipment preparation area, found a workstation, and begun the methodical process of removing her damaged scope and preparing her rifle for iron sight shooting. The scope came off easily. She'd done this exact procedure dozens of times in field conditions far worse than a well-lit preparation facility. The rifle was a standard military M40A5, not fancy or customized, but maintained with the kind of obsessive care that came from trusting your life to a weapon system. She'd carried this rifle for 3 years across 4 deployments. She knew every quirk, every tendency, every millimeter of how it performed under different conditions. With the scope removed, the rifle's iron sights were now the primary aiming system. Simple, robust mechanical sights that had been the standard for a century before optics became commonplace. No batteries to die, no electronics to fail, no glass to crack, just steel and precision machining and the shooter's ability to align them with the target. Hadley pulled out her range data book, a weathered notebook containing hundreds of pages of handwritten notes about this rifle's performance under every condition she'd encountered. Wind calls, temperature effects, elevation adjustments, even notes about how her own breathing and heart rate affected point of impact. This was 3 years of field data that no computer ballistic calculator could replicate. She spent the next 2 hours on the practice range, firing groups at progressively longer distances, 100 meters, 300 meters, 600 meters, 900 meters. Each group was measured, analyzed, recorded. Her iron sight zeros were confirmed and adjusted. Her wind reading skills were refreshed after 34 hours of travel. Her body remembered the positions, the breathing, the trigger control that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training and hundreds of hours of actual operational shooting. By the time she finished her practice session, she'd fired 60 rounds and confirmed that her rifle was performing exactly as expected. The groupings weren't quite as tight as they'd be with a quality optic, but they were well within the competition standards for scoring. Other competitors had watched portions of her practice, initially with amusement, then with growing attention as they realized her iron sight groups at 600 meters were tighter than many shooters achieved with scopes. Sullivan, the Canadian sniper, had stayed to watch her entire 900-meter session. When she finished and began packing her equipment, he approached with a more respectful expression than he'd worn at registration. "That was impressive shooting," he said. "I've trained with iron sights for qualification, but I've never seen anyone shoot them with that level of precision at distance." "Thank you," Hadley replied, continuing to pack her gear with efficient movements. "Can I ask where you trained?" "Your technique is solid, but it's not standard military instruction." "I trained a lot of places. Standard military instruction was just the beginning." Sullivan studied her for a moment, clearly trying to place her in the military shooting community's hierarchy. "You're active duty, yes? What's your unit?" "Can't discuss that?" "Right. Classified." He nodded, understanding. "Well, good luck tomorrow. I think you're going to surprise a lot of people who dismissed you at registration." "That's the plan." That evening, at the mandatory competitors briefing, the match director outlined the 3-day competition schedule. Day 1 would be individual precision shooting at known distances from 100 to 1,200 meters. Day 2 would be tactical scenarios involving unknown distances, environmental challenges, and time pressure. Day 3 would be team events and a final long-range challenge. The scoring was cumulative. Miss the target completely, 0 points. Hit the outer rings, minimal points. Hit center mass, moderate points. Hit the designated high-value zone in the center, maximum points. The shooter with the highest cumulative score after 3 days would win the Sovereign Defense International Championship and a prize package worth $50,000, plus significant bragging rights in the international shooting community. After the briefing, competitors mingled in the hospitality area. Hadley kept to herself, studying her range data book and mentally preparing for tomorrow's shooting. She'd competed in military shooting competitions before, but never at this level, never with this many elite competitors, and definitely never with iron sights while everyone else was using high-end optics. Petrov approached her table, carrying vodka in a small flask that probably violated competition rules, but nobody was enforcing. "You are the iron sight shooter, yes?" he asked, his accent thick but his English functional. "That's correct. I am curious. Why do you choose to handicap yourself? Iron sights are ancient technology. Modern optics give much advantage at distance." "My optics were damaged in transit," Hadley explained, leaving out the part about indirect fire and combat operations. "Iron sights are what I have available." "But surely you could borrow scope from another shooter, or purchase new optic? There is sporting goods store in town, only 30 minutes away." "I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm comfortable with iron sights. I've trained with them extensively." Petrov laughed, not unkindly, but with the confidence of someone who'd already written off her chances. "You have courage, I give you this. But courage does not hit target at 1,200 meters. Physics and technology hit target at 1,200 meters. Tomorrow you will see this." He walked away, leaving Hadley alone with her data book and her thoughts. She didn't blame him for his assumptions. Every rational analysis of the situation suggested she was at a massive disadvantage. Modern rifle scopes offered magnification, precise reticles for range estimation, parallax adjustment, even environmental sensors in some models. Iron sights offered none of that, just simple alignment of front and rear sight with the target. But iron sights also offered something that optics couldn't: absolute reliability. No batteries to fail, no electronics to malfunction, no glass to fog or crack. And for a shooter who'd learned to trust her fundamental skills rather than relying on technology, that reliability was worth more than any magnification advantage. Hadley returned to her room at the competitor housing facility, set her alarm for 0430 hours, and tried to sleep despite the time zone changes and accumulated travel fatigue. Tomorrow would tell the story. Either she'd prove that iron sights and skilled hands could compete with modern optics, or she'd confirm everyone's assumptions that she was out of her depth. At 0600 hours the next morning, 47 competitors assembled at the main range complex. The weather was perfect: clear skies, mild temperature, light wind, the kind of conditions that made long-range shooting as easy as it ever got. The competition format was straightforward. Each shooter would fire at targets from 100, 300, 600, 900, and 1,200 meters, 5 shots per distance, 5 minutes per stage. Targets were human silhouettes with clearly marked scoring zones. Everything was measured and recorded by electronic systems that gave instant feedback. Shooting order was determined by random draw. Hadley drew position 23, which meant she'd shoot roughly in the middle of the pack. She'd have the advantage of seeing how others performed, but wouldn't have the psychological edge of setting the pace. The first shooters began their sequences. At 100 meters, everyone performed well. This was easy shooting even for recreational marksmen. At 300 meters, some separation began appearing. By 600 meters, the elite shooters were distinguishing themselves from the merely competent. Hadley watched and learned. She observed wind conditions, noted how other shooters were reading the mirage, paid attention to which positions different competitors preferred for each distance. When her turn came, she moved to the firing line with calm efficiency. Her rifle looked almost primitive compared to the high-tech equipment the previous shooters had used. No scope, no bipod accessories, no electronic aids, just steel and wood and a shooter who knew how to use them. "Shooter ready?" called the range officer. "Ready? You may commence firing when ready." Hadley settled into position at the 100-meter line. This distance was trivial. She could make these shots in her sleep. The iron sights aligned easily on the target. She controlled her breathing, felt her heart rate slow, pressed the trigger with smooth consistency. 5 shots, 5 hits in the high-value center zone. Perfect score for the distance. She moved to the 300-meter line. Still relatively easy, but now the iron sights required more precise alignment. The target appeared smaller. Environmental factors began mattering. She adjusted her hold slightly for the light wind, aligned the sights, fired. 5 shots, 5 center hits, still perfect. By now, other competitors were watching. The woman with iron sights was keeping pace with shooters using high-end optics. Interesting, but 300 meters wasn't really the test. The real challenge would be 600 and beyond. Hadley moved to the 600-meter line. Now the shooting became genuinely difficult. At this distance, the target through iron sights was small enough that precise alignment required total concentration. The wind had picked up slightly, maybe 8 miles per hour from the left. She adjusted her aim point, accounting for bullet drift, settled into her position. The first shot hit center mass. The second shot hit center mass. The third, fourth, and fifth shots all found the high-value zone with consistency that made the range officer check his electronic scoring system to confirm the results. 5 for 5 at 600 meters with iron sights. Now, people were really watching. Petrov put down his coffee. Sullivan stopped his conversation mid-sentence. Fisher moved closer to the observation area to see better. Hadley moved to the 900-meter line. This was where modern optics showed their real advantage. At 900 meters, a human silhouette target through iron sights was barely visible as a distinct shape. Reading wind at this distance required skill that most shooters never developed because their scopes compensated for their limitations. She studied the mirage, watched the grass movement at various points between her position and the target, felt the wind on her face. The data book in her mind, 3 years of field experience shooting at distance, told her exactly how to adjust. First shot, center hit. Second shot, center hit. Third shot, slightly left of center but still in the scoring zone. Fourth shot, center hit. Fifth shot, center hit. 4 out of 5 in the high-value zone at 900 meters with iron sights. Score that was competitive with anyone who'd shot so far. The range had gone quiet. Other competitors had stopped their preparations to watch. Even the range officers were exchanging glances that suggested they were witnessing something unusual. Hadley moved to the final line. 1,200 meters, 3/4 of a mile. At this distance, even with high-powered scopes, shooting became as much art as science. Wind could change between when you fired and when the bullet arrived. Temperature affected bullet trajectory. Even the rotation of the earth became a factor that serious long-range shooters had to consider. With iron sights, this distance was considered impossible by most modern shooters. The target was barely a speck. The sights covered more of the target than they revealed. Everything had to be perfect. Position, breathing, trigger control, wind reading, and a dozen other factors that separated expert shooters from everyone else. Hadley took her time setting up this shot. She wasn't racing the clock. She had 5 minutes to fire 5 shots, and she'd use every second if necessary. She studied the wind flags at various distances. She observed the mirage. She felt the air pressure and temperature. She consulted the mental database of every 1,200-meter shot she'd made in the past 3 years, in heat and cold, in mountains and deserts, in training and in actual operations where lives depended on her accuracy. The iron sights aligned on the distant target. The front sight post looked huge compared to the tiny silhouette 1,200 meters downrange. She couldn't see the scoring zones through the sights. She couldn't see if she was holding center mass or edge. This was pure fundamentals. Trust in her training, trust in her equipment, trust in the thousands of hours of practice that had prepared her for exactly this moment. First shot, the rifle recoiled smoothly. 4 seconds later, the time it took the bullet to travel 1,200 meters, the electronic scoring system showed a hit in the center mass zone. Not quite the high-value center, but a solid hit. Second shot, another center mass hit, this one closer to the high-value zone. Third shot, high-value center. Perfect hit at 1,200 meters with iron sights. The observation area was completely silent now. Every competitor, every range officer, every observer was watching this impossible performance. Fourth shot, high-value center again. Fifth shot, Hadley adjusted slightly for a wind change she'd felt on her face, aligned the sights one final time, pressed the trigger with the same smooth control she'd used for the previous 24 shots. High-value center. 3 perfect hits at 1,200 meters with iron sights. The range officer checked his electronic system 3 times, certain there must be an error. There wasn't. Hadley Torres had just posted a score at 1,200 meters that was competitive with the best shooters in the competition, and she'd done it with iron sights that most modern shooters had never even trained with. When she rose from her shooting position and safed her rifle, the observation area erupted in applause. Not polite golf clap applause, but genuine recognition from elite shooters who understood exactly how difficult what they'd just witnessed actually was. Petrov approached first, his earlier dismissiveness completely gone. I have no words. I have shot at 1,200 meters with best scope money can buy, and you match my score with iron sights. This is not possible, but I watch you do it. It's possible with proper training and practice, Hadley replied quietly. Sullivan was next. I need to know, where did you learn to shoot like that? That wasn't standard military training. That was something else entirely. Lots of practice in difficult conditions, Hadley said, still not revealing the specifics of her background. When you can't rely on technology, you learn to rely on fundamentals. By the end of day 1, after all 47 competitors had completed the distance shooting stages, Hadley was ranked 4th overall. 3 shooters with high-end optics and perfect conditions had managed slightly better scores, but not by much. And everyone knew that tomorrow's tactical scenarios would be a completely different challenge, one where equipment advantages mattered less than adaptability and fieldcraft. That evening, the competitor dining area buzzed with conversation about the iron sight shooter who'd humiliated everyone's assumptions. Hadley sat with her data book, making notes about today's performance and planning for tomorrow's challenges. Henderson, the retired colonel who'd approved her registration, sat down across from her. I've been involved with this competition for 8 years, he said. I've seen shooters from every elite unit in the world. I've seen Olympic medalists and special operations snipers. But I've never seen anyone shoot iron sights at extreme range with the consistency you demonstrated today. Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask you a question, and you don't have to answer if it's classified. But I'm curious. Are you currently assigned to a sniper section with a Tier 1 unit? Hadley considered how to respond. Sir, I can't discuss my current assignment. What I can tell you is that I've received advanced training in precision shooting, and I've applied that training in real-world conditions that required absolute reliability from my equipment. Henderson nodded. Understood. Off the record, there are maybe 3 units in the U.S. military that produce shooters with your skill level. All of them are special mission units. All of them operate in classified conditions. And all of them train their people to shoot iron sights as a backup skill precisely because technology fails in the field. Hadley remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. Regardless of where you came from or what you do, you've earned respect today. Tomorrow's tactical scenarios are going to be interesting. The shooters with perfect equipment are going to face challenges where that equipment doesn't help as much. I'm betting that's where you'll really shine. Day 2 began with a weather change. A storm system had moved in overnight, bringing wind, light rain, and temperature drops that turned the shooting range into a test of adaptability. The tactical scenarios were designed to simulate real-world field conditions: unknown distances, moving targets, awkward shooting positions, time pressure, and environmental challenges. This was where years of operational experience gave Hadley advantages that no amount of expensive equipment could replicate. The first scenario involved engaging multiple targets at unknown distances between 200 and 800 meters from behind improvised cover in a simulated urban environment. Shooters had to quickly estimate ranges, adjust for wind, and hit targets that appeared for limited time windows. Shooters with high-powered scopes and rangefinders had technical advantages for distance estimation. But those same scopes struggled in the rain. Lenses fogged, water droplets obscured views, delicate electronics sometimes malfunctioned in the moisture. Hadley's iron sights worked perfectly regardless of the weather. Rain didn't affect simple steel sights. Her range estimation came from field experience, not electronic devices. She'd shot in worse conditions during actual operations. This was just practice with lower stakes. She dominated the urban scenario, hitting 17 out of 20 targets, including several that most competitors missed entirely. The second scenario involved shooting from a moving vehicle at stationary targets, simulating a tactical vehicle extraction under fire. The vehicle bounced over rough terrain while shooters tried to engage targets at various distances. This scenario caused problems for almost everyone. Scopes bounced and lost zero. Electronic rangefinders couldn't get stable readings from moving platforms. Shooters who'd only ever practiced from stable positions struggled to adapt. Hadley had done this exact exercise dozens of times in actual operations. She knew how to brace her rifle against vehicle movement, how to time her shots between bumps, how to account for the platform's motion. She hit 14 out of 15 targets, the best performance of the day for this scenario. The third scenario was low-light shooting at dusk, engaging targets from 100 to 600 meters as natural light faded. Many scopes struggled in low light. Illuminated reticles became too bright or too dim. Electronic systems had trouble in reduced illumination. Iron sights with tritium inserts, which Hadley's rifle had, worked perfectly in low light. She'd trained extensively for night operations and twilight shooting. This was familiar territory. She hit 22 out of 25 targets as darkness fell, another dominant performance. By the end of Day 2, Hadley had moved into first place overall. The combination of her Day 1 precision shooting and Day 2 tactical dominance had overcome the slight advantages that scope-equipped shooters had enjoyed in perfect conditions. Now, heading into Day 3's final challenges, she led the competition by a margin slim enough that anything could happen. That night, the competitive dynamic had completely shifted. The woman they'd dismissed at registration was now the shooter everyone had to beat. Petrov, Sullivan, Fisher, and the other top competitors studied the standings and realized they were chasing someone who'd proven that skill trumped technology. Day 3 featured team events in the morning and the final long-range challenge in the afternoon. The team events were randomized. Competitors drew numbers and were paired with partners they'd never worked with before. Hadley drew number 8, which paired her with Erik Larsen, a Norwegian military sniper who'd been shooting solid scores throughout the competition. "I am honored to be partnered with Iron Sight Shooter," Larsen said when they met at the team staging area. "Your shooting yesterday in rain was most impressive. I have scope with all the features, and you beat my score by wide margin." "Team events require communication more than equipment," Hadley replied. "If we work together well, we'll do fine." The team challenge involved one shooter engaging targets, while the other provided spotting and tactical guidance. They'd alternate roles, testing both shooting and communication skills. Targets ranged from 300 to 1,000 meters in a complex scenario designed to require teamwork. Hadley and Larsen worked together smoothly. He provided excellent wind calls when she was shooting. She gave him precise corrections when he was on the rifle. Their combined score was second best among all teams, only narrowly beaten by Sullivan, paired with an American Army sniper. Then came the final event, the long-range challenge. All 47 competitors would shoot at a single target, a full-size human silhouette at 1,500 meters. Each shooter got 3 attempts, hit the target anywhere, earn points based on zone struck, miss completely, earn nothing. The longest successful hit of the competition would earn bonus points and significant bragging rights. 1,500 meters was beyond what most shooters practiced. Even with high-end scopes, this distance required perfect conditions, perfect equipment, and perfect execution. Wind at this range could blow a bullet several feet off course. Temperature, humidity, altitude, even the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, everything mattered. With iron sights, 1,500 meters was considered impossible by conventional wisdom. The target was barely visible as a speck. The iron sights covered multiple feet of space at that range. A shooter couldn't see the scoring zones or even really confirm target center. This was pure calculated estimation based on environmental reading and previous data. The shooting order was reverse standings. The leader shot last. That meant Hadley would watch 46 other shooters attempt this distance before she fired. The results were humbling for everyone. Of 46 shooters with high-end scopes and perfect equipment, only 23 managed to hit the target at all. Of those 23, only 8 hit the center mass scoring zone. Only 2, Petrov and Sullivan, hit the high-value center zone. When Hadley stepped to the firing line for her 3 attempts, the pressure was significant. She'd built a lead over the 2 days, but Petrov and Sullivan both had strong performances at 1,500 meters. If she missed completely, her lead might evaporate. If she hit center, she'd likely clinch the championship. The range was completely silent as she settled into position. Every competitor, every official, every observer watched to see if the iron sight shooter could perform this final impossible task. Hadley took her time with the setup. She read the wind at multiple distances using grass movement, mirage, and feel. She consulted her mental database of long-range shooting in similar conditions. She calculated bullet drop, wind drift, and a dozen other variables that separated successful extreme-range shots from misses. The iron sights aligned on the distant target. At 1,500 meters, she couldn't see the target clearly through the sights. It was more of an impression than a visual confirmation. This was trust in mathematics, trust in her equipment's consistency, trust in environmental reading skills honed over years of field work. First shot, she pressed the trigger, felt the rifle recoil, waited the 5 seconds for bullet flight, hit, center mass zone. Not quite high value, but a solid scoring hit at 1,500 meters with iron sights. The observation area erupted in applause, but Hadley blocked it out. She had 2 more attempts, and she wanted to improve the hit. Second shot, she adjusted slightly based on what the first shot had told her about current conditions, aligned the sights, fired. High-value center zone, perfect hit at 1,500 meters with iron sights that most modern shooters had never even trained with. The applause was deafening now, but Hadley remained focused. 1 more shot, 1 more chance to prove that skill and fundamentals could overcome any technological advantage. Third shot. She made a tiny adjustment for what felt like a slight wind shift, aligned the sights 1 final time, executed the perfect trigger press, high-value center zone. Again, 2 perfect hits out of 3 attempts at 1,500 meters with iron sights. When the electronic scoring system confirmed the results, the range erupted in genuine celebration. Elite shooters from around the world, competitors who took their craft as seriously as Olympic athletes, stood and applauded a performance that shouldn't have been possible, but had just been proven real. Hadley Torres had won the Sovereign Defense International Sniper Competition, shooting iron sights against the world's best-equipped shooters with modern optics. At the award ceremony that evening, she stood on the podium holding a trophy while cameras flashed and officials made speeches about excellence and skill. Petrov was second place. Sullivan was third. Both approached her afterward with genuine respect. I will never mock iron sights again, Petrov said, shaking her hand. You have taught important lesson about fundamentals and skill. I will go home and train with iron sights so I never forget this lesson. You're a hell of a shooter, Sullivan added. I've worked with snipers from JTF-2, Delta, SEAL teams, all the Tier 1 units. You shoot like someone from that world. Whatever unit you're with, they're lucky to have you. Hadley accepted the compliments gracefully, but didn't confirm or deny anything about her background. Some things remained classified regardless of competition results. Henderson found her during the reception. Congratulations, Instructor Torres. I did some research. Apparently that's your actual rank with your unit. Instructor for Advanced Sniper Training with a very specific Special Mission Unit. Hadley smiled slightly. I can neither confirm nor deny that, sir. Of course not. But I can tell you this. You've just become a legend in the international shooting community. The woman who won with iron sights against the world's best-equipped competitors. That story is going to be told for years. 3 days later, Hadley was back on a military transport heading to her classified duty station. Her damaged scope was in her equipment case, still cracked and useless. She hadn't bothered replacing it. Iron sights had proven more than adequate. Her phone buzzed with a message from her commander. Saw the competition results. Well done, but next time, maybe don't draw quite so much attention to your capabilities. Try to stay low profile. Hadley smiled and typed a response. Understood, sir. Though I should mention they now want me to conduct training seminars on iron sight shooting at distance. Might be good for the reputation of our program. The response came quickly. Approved. Teach them. Just don't tell them which unit you're from. Hadley looked out the aircraft window at clouds passing below and thought about 3 days that had proven something important, not just to the other competitors, but to herself. Technology was wonderful. Modern scopes were incredible tools that extended human capability in remarkable ways. But technology was just a tool, and tools could fail. Fundamental skills, the ability to read wind, estimate range, control breathing, press a trigger with consistency, those skills never failed. She'd competed against the world's best-equipped shooters and proven that a skilled operator with iron sights could match anyone with a scope. Not because iron sights were better, they weren't, but because skill was the ultimate equalizer, and no amount of technology could replace thousands of hours of disciplined practice. Somewhere in the Middle East, there were operations that needed running, overwatch positions that needed manning, and missions that required someone who could hit targets at distance regardless of equipment condition. Hadley Torres was ready to get back to that work, but now, when she deployed with her iron sights as backup to her primary optic, she'd remember a 3-day competition where she'd proven to the world what she'd always known. A skilled shooter didn't need perfect equipment. A skilled shooter made perfect shots with whatever equipment they had. And when everyone else was laughing at damaged scopes and impossible conditions, a skilled shooter just removed the scope, adjusted the iron sights, and got to work. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of brave women in uniform.